the promise in silver. The rain hammered against the windows of the small apartment in Nazimabad, but inside, warmth filled every corner. Zainab sat cross-legged on the floor, helping Faisal organize documents for his first property deal. They had been married 6 months, and every day felt like building something together, brick by brick, dream by dream. "You're going to make it," she whispered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know you will." Faisal looked up from the papers, his eyes soft with gratitude. Back then, he looked at her like she hung the moon. "When I do, Zainab, I promise, I'll give you everything. We'll move to defense, have a house with a garden like you always wanted, and I'll make your grandmother proud." Zainab smiled, her fingers instinctively reaching for the pendant at her throat. It was an unusual piece, an emerald set in oxidized silver, with intricate Mughal-inspired filigree work. The green stone caught the dim light of their apartment, glowing like a secret. "Dottie gave this to me the day we got married," she said softly. It belonged to her mother, who wore it during the partition journey from Delhi to Karachi. She said it survived everything: violence, loss, new beginnings. She told me to keep it close, that it would remind me who I am when everything else changes. Faisal reached out and touched the pendant gently. "It's beautiful. Old-fashioned but beautiful, just like your family's values. One day, maybe we'll have a daughter, and I'll pass it to her," Zainab mused, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "One day," Faisal agreed, kissing her forehead. "But first, let me build us an empire." 5 years passed like pages turning too quickly. Faisal's company, Siddiqui Developments, became a household name. The small apartment gave way to a sprawling mansion in Defense Housing Authority. The modest dinners transformed into catered galas. Zainab watched her husband change, not all at once, but in small increments, the way he stopped asking about her day, the way his phone became more important than their conversations, the way his eyes grew distant even when he sat beside her. She threw herself into her work at the National Museum, curating exhibitions about Pakistan's cultural heritage. It gave her purpose when her marriage began to feel like a beautiful frame with no picture inside. "You're always at that museum," Faisal said one evening, loosening his tie without looking at her. "Hassan and I have the Chinese investors' dinner next week. Make sure you're there. Wear something impressive." "I always do," Zainab replied quietly, watching him scroll through his phone. She still wore her grandmother's pendant every day, though Faisal had bought her dozens of modern pieces: Cartier, Tiffany, Bulgari, all of which sat untouched in velvet boxes. "Why do you still wear that old thing?" he asked, gesturing at her neck with mild irritation. "I've given you real jewelry, Zainab." "That looks like something from a refugee's trunk." The words stung more than he knew. "Because it means something," she said simply. Faisal shrugged, already moving toward his study. "Sentiment doesn't photograph well. Think about it." That night, Zainab stood in her dressing room touching the pendant. The emerald felt warm against her skin, as if her grandmother's spirit still lived within it. She remembered Amina Begum's final words before she passed. "This pendant knows truth from lies, Beta. Never let anyone make you forget where you came from." Outside her window, Karachi glittered with ambition and artifice. Somewhere in that sprawling city, her husband was becoming someone she no longer recognized. But Zainab remained herself, rooted, dignified, holding on to the only inheritance that truly mattered. She didn't know yet that the pendant would soon reveal its greatest secret, or that the promise Faisal made in that small apartment had already been broken in ways she couldn't imagine. The gala of shadows, the Karachi Grand Ballroom, sparkled like a jewelry box come to life. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, where Pakistan's elite gathered in designer silks and Italian suits. The annual Children's Heart Foundation Gala was the event of the season, where reputations were built, deals were sealed, and appearances mattered more than authenticity. Zainab arrived alone, as had become her custom. Faisal always had pre-event meetings that ran late, leaving her to make gracious entrances by herself. She wore a deep burgundy sari with delicate gold embroidery, her hair swept into an elegant bun, and at her throat, as always, rested her grandmother's emerald pendant, the oxidized silver providing a striking contrast against the silk. Zainab. "You look absolutely regal," called out Samira Chaudhry, a fellow museum board member. "That pendant is exquisite. So refreshingly different from all these modern pieces everyone's wearing." "Thank you." Zainab smiled warmly. "It's been in my family for 3 generations." As she moved through the crowd, accepting compliments and engaging in polite conversation about her upcoming exhibition on partition-era artifacts, she felt the familiar hollowness of attending these events without truly being part of them. She was always Faisal Siddiqui's wife first, Zainab, the curator, second. The murmurs began around 9 o'clock. Zainab was speaking with the museum director when she noticed heads turning toward the entrance. The whispers rippled through the ballroom like wind through wheat. She turned, along with everyone else, to see what had captured their attention. Faisal stood at the top of the stairs, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue suit. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, holding his arm with possessive familiarity, was Natasha Khawaja, a woman Zainab recognized from social media and fashion magazines. She was perhaps 26, with perfect features and an Instagram following that made her influential in Karachi's younger social set, but it wasn't Natasha's beauty or her champagne-colored gown that made Zainab's breath catch in her throat. It was the necklace. Around Natasha's neck hung an emerald pendant in oxidized silver, with the same Mughal-inspired filigree work, the same unusual setting, the same antique craftsmanship. It was identical to the one Zainab wore, impossibly, unmistakably identical. The ballroom seemed to tilt. Zainab gripped her champagne glass tighter, forcing her face to remain calm even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Around her, the whispers grew louder, less discreet. "Is that the same necklace? How is that possible? Did you see Zainab's face? I heard she's been his mistress for 6 months. The audacity to wear it publicly. Faisal's eyes found Zainab's across the room. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, guilt perhaps, or defiance. But then Natasha whispered something in his ear, and he smiled, leading her toward the bar without acknowledging his wife. Samira touched Zainab's elbow gently. "Are you all right? Do you want to leave?" "No," Zainab said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm perfectly fine." She wasn't fine. But she had learned long ago that dignity was sometimes the only weapon a woman had in a world designed to humiliate her. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Throughout the evening, Zainab maintained her composure with the grace of someone trained in the art of survival. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at appropriate jokes, and discussed her museum work with genuine enthusiasm. But she watched. She observed how Natasha touched the pendant frequently, drawing attention to it. She noticed how Faisal introduced Natasha to his business associates with barely concealed pride. She saw Hassan Rizvi, Faisal's business partner, avoiding her eyes with guilt written across his face. The confrontation she knew was coming arrived near the dessert course. A society journalist named Farah, known for her sharp tongue and sharper pen, approached their table where Zainab sat with several museum board members. "Zainab, darling, I must ask, and forgive my directness, but that stunning pendant Natasha Khawaja is wearing looks remarkably similar to yours. In fact, I'd say they're identical. What an extraordinary coincidence, don't you think?" The table fell silent. All eyes turned to Zainab. She took a delicate sip of her water before responding, her voice calm and measured. "The pendant I'm wearing was commissioned in 1947 by my great-grandfather for my great-grandmother. It's one of a kind, designed by a master craftsman who fled Delhi during partition. Perhaps what Miss Khawaja is wearing is inspired by antique designs. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, after all." The subtle dig landed perfectly. Farah's eyes gleamed with the scent of scandal. But before the conversation could continue, Natasha herself appeared at the table, Faisal trailing behind her with an expression Zainab couldn't quite read. "I couldn't help but overhear," Natasha said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Actually, my pendant isn't an imitation. Faisal had it specially made for me last month by one of the finest jewelers in Dubai. He said he wanted to give me something unique, something that reflected my personality. One of a kind. His exact words. She touched the pendant possessively, her eyes meeting Zainab's with unmistakable challenge. The table had gone from silent to absolutely frozen. This was beyond social impropriety. This was open warfare, conducted with smiles and jewelry instead of weapons. Zainab felt every eye in their section of the ballroom upon her. She could feel the weight of expectation. Would she make a scene? Would she cry? Would she confront her husband publicly? She did none of those things. Instead, she stood gracefully, smoothing her sari with elegant hands. She looked at Natasha, then at Faisal, her expression serene and unreadable. "How wonderful that you have something you treasure," she said softly. "I hope it brings you as much meaning as mine has brought me." Then she turned to the museum director. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the auction items we donated. The evening's purpose is the children's hospital, after all. Everything else is just decoration." She walked away with her head high, leaving behind a table full of shocked faces and a husband who, for the first time in years, looked uncertain. In the ladies' room, Zainab finally allowed herself to breathe. She stared at her reflection, her carefully applied makeup, her composed expression, her grandmother's pendant resting against her collarbone like a talisman. Her hands trembled as she gripped the marble sink. Mahira, her sister, burst through the door moments later, her lawyer's mind already working through scenarios. "I just heard." "Zainab, what are you going to do?" Zainab touched the pendant gently, feeling the cool metal against her fingertips. In that moment, she remembered something her grandmother had told her years ago, something she'd almost forgotten. "This pendant has a secret, Beta. One day when you need it most, that secret will protect you." "I'm going to find the truth," Zainab said quietly, meeting her sister's eyes in the mirror. "And then I'm going to let the truth speak for itself." She didn't know it yet, but that pendant held more than sentimental value. It held evidence. It held history. And it held the key to unraveling every lie Faisal had built his new life upon. The gala continued around them, but for Zainab, the real evening was just beginning. The archive of truth. The morning after the gala, Karachi's social media exploded. Fashion bloggers analyzed every angle of the twin pendants. WhatsApp groups buzzed with speculation. Instagram stories dissected the scandal with the thoroughness of forensic investigators. By noon, her pendant gate was trending and Zainab's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She ignored it all. Instead, she sat in her grandmother's old bedroom, the one room in their mansion that Zainab had insisted remain unchanged after Amina Begum passed away 3 years ago. Faisal had wanted to renovate it into a home gym, but Zainab had refused with such quiet firmness that even he hadn't pushed. Now, surrounded by her grandmother's belongings, Zainab searched for answers. The old wooden almari still held Amina Begum's saris, each one wrapped in tissue paper and sprinkled with dried neem leaves to keep moths away. The dressing table displayed black and white photographs of her grandmother as a young bride, as a mother, as a matriarch. And in the bottom drawer, beneath layers of embroidered handkerchiefs and old letters, Zainab found what she was looking for. A small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age, filled with her grandmother's elegant Urdu script. Zainab's hands trembled as she opened it. The entries dated back to 1947, documenting the journey from Delhi to Karachi. But it was an entry from 1948 that made her heart race. Today, Jamil Bai completed the pendant. It took him 6 months, 6 months of careful work, of melting down the silver jewelry we carried from Delhi, of setting the emerald that belonged to my mother. But it is finished and it is perfect. He has done something special, something I asked him to do in case our family ever needs proof of our history. Inside the pendant's backing, hidden where no one would think to look, he has engraved our family name, the date, and a small verse from Ghalib that my mother loved. The inscription is so fine, so delicate, that only someone who knows it exists would ever find it. But it is there, our truth, preserved in silver and stone, waiting to be discovered if ever our story is questioned. Zainab's breath caught. An inscription. hidden inside the pendant's backing. She quickly removed the pendant from around her neck, examining it with new eyes. The backing appeared solid, seamless, but her grandmother's words suggested otherwise. She would need an expert to open it without damaging the piece. Her phone buzzed. It was Mahira. At the office. Found something about Faisal's accounts. Call me. But first, Zainab needed to visit someone she hadn't seen in years. The old jewelry quarter in Sadar was a labyrinth of narrow shops, each one overflowing with gold bangles, diamond rings, and pearl sets. But Zainab walked past the modern jewelers until she reached a tiny shop at the end of the lane, so small it barely qualified as a storefront. The sign above read, Jamil and Sons, after 1948. An elderly man sat behind the counter, examining a piece through a jeweler's loupe. When Zainab entered, he looked up and his weathered face broke into a smile of recognition. Amina Begum's granddaughter, he said softly, rising with difficulty from his stool. I remember you as a child, always holding your Dadi's hand. You have her eyes. Uncle Rafiq? Zainab asked. Jamil had passed away long ago, but his son had continued the business. The same, though older and more bent than when you last saw me. He gestured for her to sit. I wondered if you would come. After I saw the pictures from last night's gala, I told my son, she will come asking questions. Zainab felt a surge of hope. You saw the photographs? My granddaughter showed me on her phone. These modern inventions. He shook his head with a mixture of wonder and disapproval. The pendant that girl wore, it looks like your grandmother's piece. But I know it cannot be. There was only ever one. Can you tell me about it? About how it was made? Rafiq moved slowly to a locked cabinet, removing an old ledger similar to her grandmother's journal. My father kept meticulous records. Every piece, every commission, every detail. Here, 1948, March 15th. Emerald pendant for Amina Begum, daughter of Delhi jeweler Hashim Mirza. Silver from family pieces melted and reformed. Mughal filigree pattern specific to Mirza family designs. 1 emerald, 3 carats, slightly included but fine color. Special request, hidden inscription inside backing piece. He looked up at Zainab. My father created a backing that could be opened only by someone who knew the mechanism. A small catch, disguised as part of the design. Would you like me to open yours? Zainab handed him the pendant with trembling fingers. Rafiq cleaned his loupe and examined the piece under bright light, his gnarled fingers moving with the practiced expertise of a lifetime. He pressed a tiny portion of the filigree work in a specific pattern. 2 presses left. 1 press right, a gentle twist. The backing released with the softest click. Inside, engraved in script so fine it was nearly microscopic, was text that made Zainab's eyes well with tears. Mirza family. Delhi. 15 March 1948. Hazaron ख्वाहिशन ऐसी के हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले, Ghalib. Thousands of desires, each worth dying for. This inscription, Rafiq said gently, proves this pendant's creation date and origin. No modern jeweler could replicate this. The technique my father used, the specific tools, even the style of engraving belongs to a different era. This is your proof, Beta. This pendant was made 77 years ago, when your husband was not even born. Zainab photographed the inscription with her phone, her mind racing. Could someone have copied it? Made a replica? A replica, yes, but not an exact one. The emerald in your pendant has specific inclusions, like a fingerprint unique to this stone. The silver has aged in a particular way. The filigree work shows wear patterns consistent with decades of use. And most importantly, no replica would have this inscription, because no one except your grandmother, my father, and now you and I knew it existed. So the pendant Natasha Khawaja wore is either a modern copy or, Rafiq paused, his expression troubled, or it is a fraud, meant to appear identical but lacking any of the historical authenticity. The question is, who commissioned it and what did they claim when they ordered it? Zainab's phone rang. Mahira again. This time she answered. Where are you? Her sister asked urgently. You need to get to my office right now. I've been going through the documents you gave me access to, Faisal's company accounts. Zainab, there are irregularities. Large ones. What kind of irregularities? The kind that involve unexplained cash withdrawals, payments to luxury goods suppliers, and transfers to personal accounts that shouldn't exist. And here's the interesting part. One of those payments made last month was to a Dubai jeweler. Guess how much? 300,000 rupees. For a custom emerald pendant. Zainab's hand tightened on her phone. He used company money? Not just company money, investor money. The Chinese investment group that came in 6 months ago, their funds were supposed to go toward the new commercial development in Clifton. Instead, it looks like portions have been diverted for personal expenses. And Zainab Hassan Rizvi's name is on some of these documents, too. He might have been covering for Faisal, or he might be involved. Either way, this is embezzlement. Serious, send-you-to-prison embezzlement? Zainab thanked Rafiq, carefully securing her pendant, now with its secret revealed, back around her neck. As she stepped out into Sadar's chaotic streets, she felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. Her grandmother had been right. The pendant did protect her, not through magic, but through truth. Through evidence that couldn't be disputed. Through history that couldn't be rewritten. She thought of Faisal's face last night, that mixture of arrogance and certainty. He had thought himself untouchable, had thought his wealth and status made him immune to consequences. He had given his mistress a fake pendant, a symbol of their entire relationship. Really? Using stolen money to create a cheap imitation of something real. The irony was almost poetic. By the time Zainab reached Mahira's law office in Clifton, she had a plan. Not for revenge, revenge was messy and beneath her, but for truth, for justice, and for reclaiming the dignity that Faisal had tried so hard to strip from her. "Tell me everything," she said to Mahira, settling into the leather chair across from her sister's desk. "Every detail, every document, every piece of evidence. And then tell me about Pakistan's laws regarding financial fraud and embezzlement." Mahira smiled, a sharp lawyer's smile that promised strategic brilliance. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let me show you what I found." As her sister spread documents across the desk, Zainab touched her pendant gently. Inside it, hidden in silver and script, rested 77 years of survival, of women who had endured partition, poverty, and patriarchy with their dignity intact. She would honor that legacy. Not with tears or dramatics, but with truth. Clear, documented, irrefutable truth. The gathering storm was about to break, and Faisal Siddiqui had no idea that his wife held thunder in her hands. The unveiling. The National Museum's main gallery had been transformed into a shrine of memory and survival. Photographs lined the walls, sepia-toned images of families fleeing across borders, of women clutching children and whatever possessions they could carry, of trains packed with refugees hoping for safety in a newly created nation. Display cases held artifacts from 1947, threadbare saris, worn prayer books, cooking utensils, and jewelry. Always jewelry. The portable wealth that women had carried across the bleeding border of partition. Threads of survival. Women's Treasures from Partition was Zainab's most ambitious exhibition yet. She had spent 18 months collecting oral histories, gathering artifacts, and documenting the stories of women who had survived that brutal summer when India was divided and millions were displaced. Tonight was the opening gala. Broadcast live on national television and streaming online, journalists from major outlets had confirmed attendance. Government officials, historians, and academics would be present. And most importantly, because Karachi's elite never missed a social event, the city's wealthy families had purchased tickets, attracted by the spectacle if not the substance. Zainab wore a simple white sari, elegant in its restraint, and at her throat, her grandmother's pendant, polished to a soft glow under the gallery lights. Faisal had not wanted her to proceed with the exhibition. "This is embarrassing," he'd said 2 days ago, standing in their bedroom while she prepared notes. "After what happened at the gala, people are talking. You're making us look ridiculous with this pendant obsession. Cancel the event, Zainab. Show some dignity." She had looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. The man who had promised her the world in a small apartment in Nazimabad, who had held her hand and called her his strength, had become someone she no longer recognized. His face was harder now, his eyes cold with calculation rather than warm with love. "No," she'd said simply. "This exhibition is happening. If you don't wish to attend, that's your choice." He had attended anyway, arriving with several business associates, but noticeably without Natasha. Hassan Rizvi stood beside him, both men wearing expressions of forced casualness. But Zainab could see the tension in Faisal's shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting around the room as if searching for threats. He should be nervous, she thought. He just doesn't know why yet. The exhibition opening proceeded with speeches from museum officials and historians. Then it was Zainab's turn. She stepped up to the podium, looking out over the crowd of faces, some genuinely interested in the history, others merely present for the social currency. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice steady and clear. "This exhibition tells the stories of women who lost everything in 1947, their homes, their families, sometimes their lives. But they carried forward what they could, their faith, their strength, and occasionally, small treasures that connected them to who they had been before the world was torn apart." She paused, touching the pendant at her throat. "My great-grandmother was one of these women. She walked from Delhi to Karachi carrying only what she could fit in a small bag. Among those possessions was an emerald that had belonged to her mother and silver jewelry that represented 3 generations of her family. When she reached Karachi, she commissioned a master craftsman named Jamil to melt down that silver and set that emerald into a single pendant, a piece that would tell her story, preserve her history, and serve as a reminder to her descendants of where we came from." Cameras focused on the pendant. In the crowd, she saw Faisal shift uncomfortably. "What makes this pendant extraordinary isn't its monetary value. The emerald is included, the silver is oxidized and old. What makes it extraordinary is its truth. The craftsman who created it, at my great-grandmother's request, included a hidden element, an inscription inside the backing that documents the pendant's creation date, the family name, and a verse from the poet Ghalib that my great-great-grandmother loved." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Journalists leaned forward, sensing a story. "For 77 years, this pendant has been passed from mother to daughter in my family. My great-grandmother wore it. My grandmother wore it. My grandmother gave it to me on my wedding day with these words: 'This pendant knows truth from lies, Beta. Never let anyone make you forget where you came from.'" Zainab's eyes found Faisal's across the room. He had gone pale. Recently, questions arose about this pendant's authenticity and uniqueness. Another pendant appeared, nearly identical in design, and claims were made that it too was one of a kind, commissioned by someone as a special gift. This presented an interesting historical puzzle. How could 2 identical pendants exist if the original was truly unique? She signaled to the museum's technical team. On the large screen behind her, images appeared. The original commission ledger from 1948, photographed at Rafiq's shop. Jamil's meticulous handwriting, documenting every detail of the pendant's creation. This is the original craftsman's record, dated March 15, 1948. It documents the commission, the materials used, and the specific design elements unique to my family. But more importantly, the next image showed the pendant's hidden backing, opened to reveal the inscription. The microscopic script was magnified on screen, clear enough for everyone to read. Mirza family, Delhi, 15 March 1948. Hazaron ख्वाहिशें ऐसी के हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले. Ghalib, gasps echoed through the gallery. Cameras flashed. Journalists frantically typed notes. "This inscription," Zainab continued, her voice unwavering, "proves beyond doubt that my pendant was created 77 years ago, using techniques and tools that no longer exist in modern jewelry making. The engraving style, the silver composition, even the specific inclusions in the emerald, all of these elements have been verified by expert gemologists and metallurgists. Their reports are available in your information packets." She paused, letting the information settle. Any pendant that claims to be identical to this one, created recently, would by definition be a copy, a replica designed to imitate the original. Which raises interesting questions. Who commissioned such a copy? Why? And perhaps most importantly, how was it paid for? The room had gone absolutely silent. In the crowd, Faisal started moving toward the exit, but Hassan grabbed his arm, stopping him. Drawing attention to themselves by leaving now would only make things worse. Mahira stood near the back, her expression carefully neutral, but Zainab could see the pride in her sister's eyes. "I'm sharing this story tonight," Zainab said, not to embarrass anyone or seek revenge, but because truth matters. In this exhibition, we celebrate women who survived by holding on to truth, the truth of who they were, where they came from, what they valued. They didn't survive by creating false narratives or buying cheap imitations of authenticity. They survived by staying true to themselves, even when the world tried to erase them. She looked directly at Faisal. In our modern world, it's easy to confuse wealth with worth, to believe that anything can be bought or replicated, that history and heritage are just accessories to be copied when convenient. But some things, truth, dignity, legacy, cannot be faked. They can only be earned, preserved, and passed forward with honesty. The speech concluded with thunderous applause. Journalists surrounded Zainab immediately, all asking variations of the same questions. Was she talking about Natasha Khawaja? Was the pendant at the charity gala a fake? What did her husband think about all this? "I'm simply presenting historical facts," Zainab replied gracefully to each question. How people choose to interpret those facts is their business. Tonight is about honoring the women of partition, not modern scandals. But everyone knew. In a city that thrived on gossip and innuendo, Zainab had done something revolutionary. She had presented irrefutable evidence, packaged as cultural education, broadcast to thousands of viewers. She hadn't mentioned Faisal's name. She hadn't accused Natasha directly. But she hadn't needed to. Within an hour, social media erupted. Screenshots of the inscription went viral. Fashion bloggers who had covered the charity gala scrambled to update their posts. Someone dug up the original photos of Natasha's pendant and compared them side by side with Zainab's, and the differences became apparent under scrutiny. The quality of the metalwork, the slight variation in the filigree pattern, the telling lack of aging in Natasha's supposedly one-of-a-kind piece, but the real explosion came the next morning. The investigation that Mahira had quietly initiated weeks ago, after discovering the financial irregularities in Faisal's accounts, concluded overnight. Federal investigators, prompted by anonymous tips backed with documentation, raided Siddiqui Development's offices at dawn. The news broke during morning talk shows. Real estate mogul Faisal Siddiqui under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. The details emerged in damning succession. 3 million rupees diverted from Chinese investor funds. Company money used for personal expenses, including luxury gifts and jewelry purchases. Falsified documents. Shell companies. And Hassan Rizvi trying desperately to distance himself, providing evidence against Faisal to save his own position. The Dubai jeweler's receipt for Natasha's pendant, paid for with company funds, was particularly devastating. 300,000 rupees for a replica emerald pendant based on antique Mughal design, modern materials. The woman who stayed true. 6 months after the exhibition, Karachi had moved on to new scandals and fresh gossip. But the consequences of that night at the National Museum continued to ripple outward like stones cast into still water. Zainab sat in her new apartment, a modest but elegant space in Clifton, overlooking the Arabian Sea. After the investigation had concluded and Faisal's assets were frozen, she had filed for divorce with quiet efficiency. She didn't ask for much in the settlement, just what was rightfully hers from before the marriage, and the freedom to rebuild her life on her own terms. The defense mansion, the luxury cars, the designer wardrobe, all of it had meant nothing to her. They were props in someone else's story, a narrative of success that had been built on lies and borrowed money. She took only her grandmother's belongings, her books, and the clothes that had been gifts from her family. And of course the pendant. Her work at the museum had expanded after the exhibition's success. Threads of Survival had been extended for 6 months due to popular demand and was being adapted into a traveling exhibition that would tour universities across Pakistan. Zainab had been promoted to senior curator and had begun documenting more oral histories, this time focusing on the women who had built businesses and lives in Karachi after partition. She was interviewing a 90-year-old woman named Rashida Begum one afternoon when her phone buzzed. Mahira's name flashed on the screen. "He's here," her sister's text read. "At your building. The security called me." Zainab knew without asking who he was. 6 months of silence, and now Faisal had finally come. She finished her interview, thanked Rashida Begum for sharing her story, and walked home slowly, giving herself time to prepare. The sun was setting over the sea, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for the conversation ahead. Faisal sat on the bench outside her apartment building, and Zainab barely recognized him. The confident, commanding businessman had vanished, replaced by someone who looked hollowed out and exhausted. His suit was expensive but rumpled. His hair, always carefully styled, was unkempt. He had lost weight, and his eyes carried the look of someone who had been forced to confront truths he had spent years avoiding. When he saw her, he stood quickly, almost stumbling. "Zainab," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you for... I know you could have told security not to let me in." "I could have," she agreed calmly, stopping a few feet away from him. She didn't invite him upstairs. Whatever he had to say could be said here. "I've been..." he started, then stopped, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "I've been living with Hassan's cousin. The court case is still ongoing. The lawyers say I'll probably serve at least 2 years, maybe more. All the accounts are frozen. The company is being sold off piece by piece to repay the investors." Zainab said nothing, simply waited. This wasn't her problem to solve, and she wouldn't pretend otherwise. "Natasha left," he continued, a bitter laugh escaping him. "The moment the news broke, she was gone. Deleted all our photos from social media, blocked my number, moved to Dubai. I heard she's with some sheikh now. Someone with actual money, not just debt and legal problems." Still, Zainab remained silent. What did he expect? Sympathy? Absolution? "I came to..." Faisal's voice cracked. "I came to apologize. I know it doesn't mean anything now. I know it doesn't fix what I destroyed. But I need you to know I'm sorry for all of it. For forgetting what we had, for treating you like you didn't matter, for humiliating you with that pendant." His eyes moved to her throat, where her grandmother's emerald rested as always. "You were right," he whispered. "About everything. That pendant, your grandmother's pendant, it was real. It meant something. And the one I bought for Natasha, the one I thought made me look successful and generous, it was fake, just like everything else I built." A sea breeze lifted Zainab's dupatta, and she adjusted it with calm, practiced movements. She had imagined this moment many times over the past 6 months. What she would say, how she would feel. Would there be satisfaction in seeing him broken? Would there be lingering pain at the reminder of betrayal? But now, standing before him, she felt only a quiet, profound peace. "You didn't just forget what we had, Faisal," she said gently. "You forgot who you were. The man I married in that small Nazimabad apartment, he had integrity. He had dreams built on honest work. He looked at me like I was his partner, not an accessory. Somewhere along the way, you decided that man wasn't enough. You decided that success meant marble floors and society pages and women like Natasha who only valued you for your wealth." Faisal's eyes filled with tears. I know that now. When the money started coming, when we moved in those circles, I felt like I had to be someone different, someone bigger, more impressive. And you never changed. You stayed exactly who you were, and I resented you for it. I resented that you didn't need the wealth, that you cared more about those museum artifacts than about the car I bought or the parties I threw. Because those things were never what mattered," Zainab said. "My grandmother survived partition with nothing but an emerald and her faith. My mother built a life-teaching school in a neighborhood where nobody cared about designer labels. I learned from them that dignity isn't something you buy. It's something you carry inside yourself. You can lose everything else, but if you keep your dignity, you keep your soul." "And I lost mine," Faisal said, his voice breaking completely. I lost my soul, Zainab, and I lost you. And I don't know I don't know if I can. You can, Zainab interrupted firmly. But not with me, and not by returning to who you pretended to be. You need to find out who you actually are, Faisal. Not the struggling young man from Nazimabad, not the wealthy businessman from Defense. The real person underneath all those roles. He looked at her with desperate hope. Is there any chance? After everything, could we? No, she said gently but definitively. What we had ended the night you chose to give someone else a copy of my grandmother's pendant, not because of what it symbolized about your affair.